far this session, I got a chance to talk to Bill a little bit, and it's funny because even as a QA consulting company, we have a lot of our clients, they're actually using hands-off project management tools. So I'm definitely excited, and Bill is going to be talking about how he integrates QA into the development cycle. Thank you.
Let's see if I can do this with this microphone. So what we're really going to do for the next 45 minutes, I want to leave a little bit of time for question answering, is talk about my philosophies on how to integrate QA into the development process. This isn't about the actual solution. This is about the philosophy behind bringing embedded teams into your development teams and bringing your central testing teams into the development process. When I talk about that, we have our 3 circles. This is fairly traditional across development groups. We've got our team here, and we've got our embedded team that's sitting somewhere in the studio, but probably not with the team. And then we've got our central QA. My goal is this. We want to bring the embedded team, sit them with the team, and by with the team, I mean sitting next to a developer, next to an artist. I want these people talking on a daily basis. And the same thing with central QA. We're not going to have them sitting with the team, but we're going to involve them in more of the process. Let's see if my clicker will work here. Yep. So embedded teams, we want to integrate into the design process. We want to integrate them into the development process. There we go. Central QA, we want to integrate their general bug database management. We'll talk about these more in detail here in a few minutes. And development teams, we want to talk about how to better manage escaped bugs. So we're going to focus in this session a lot on quality, delivering quality versus quantity, which is something that we typically struggle with. So I'll tell you that I'm more of an agile project manager. So I like to throw up this slide, which is kind of a play on agile. For those of you who've been using agile, so just take a moment and read that, and then we'll talk about it from there. So if you've read it, the idea is that the chicken and the pig, they want to open a restaurant, and the output of this is that the chicken would just be a bystander. The chicken's producing the eggs for the restaurant, the eggs portion, but the pig is committed. The pig is the one who's stuck doing it because he's the ham behind us, right? So when we talk about it in agile terms, we need to make the commitment as a QA team. You want to get involved in the team process. So this actually means that you have to go out and force yourself on that team. Sometimes teams need to be poked a little bit, need to be involved a little bit more. They need to know that you need to be involved in that process. That means you need to be attending their meetings, their sprint release planning, sprint review planning, retrospectives, whatever it might be. But in addition, attend the daily stand-up. I visited a number of studios in my current role, and I've watched these various meetings and reviews. And I was involved in a bunch of daily stand-ups a few weeks ago, and I noticed an interesting thing. The developers were there, the artists were there, the managers were there, the product owners, scrum masters, but there was not one representative from QA there. Doesn't sound very smart, does it? So as a committed member of the team, embedded QA lead at least, preferably the QA testers that are embedded, you need to be there and be a pig. You need to be committed and talking about what are you doing today, what did you do yesterday, and what's blocking you from testing the product. On top of that, if you're going to be involved in these processes, you need to educate yourself. Extend your current understandings of the process. That means classes, books, conferences like this one, the Casual Connect conference. If you're using Agile, look at some of these different certifications. I will tell you that QA teams or QA resources typically make great Scrum Masters because it's about process. They also make good product owners, but they also the reason they make great Scrum Masters is because they can get involved in the process of making something and verifying that what was delivered was quality and complete. So get some certifications so that you can talk one-on-one level with the existing product owner, the existing project manager, producer, product owner, whatever it might be. And also get involved in the Agile estimating and planning process. And of course, these are classes that you can take from various experts, Mike Cohn, different people. And if you're in a waterfall project, I suggest you buy, it's called the PMBOK, Project Management Book of Knowledge, and take a look at that book. It will explain a lot of just the basic philosophies of waterfall for you, but it will also help you speak more equally, I guess I would say, with the project managers and team leaders. So this is where we get down to my philosophy. I'm an advocate of a partnership not an adversarial relationship. When I first went to work for a game development studio, there was QA on one side, and there was the game team on the other side, and there was this adversarial relationship between the two. Well, that's not healthy. Let's CD, who I know quite well here. If CD's got a problem with the way I'm doing something, I've got a problem with the way he's doing something, we're probably not going to be partners. We're probably not going to communicate as well as we could. So, conflict between development teams is counterproductive, right? If you can't talk to somebody and resolve an issue easily, then there's going to be an issue. Open but productive and honest communication. So be upfront with each other. It never helps if somebody's hiding information simply because they don't want to have that conflict. It's okay if there's, hey, look, you're not delivering quality code or a quality product, and we're unable to test this particular section. It's different to do that in a combative manner. But you need to be open and honest about things. Understanding of all viewpoints. I am guilty of this, as many project managers probably have been in the past. I have had bugs come in and been irritated by those bugs. QA has a reason for bugging them. So I learned what I needed to, which was to take a look at the bug in an open, honest way and understand what's the value to the product, what's the value to the team, and why is QA looking at this. On the same side, or on the other side of that, as QA leaders, we need to make sure that we're looking at the same thing. What is the team's goal? Why is it that the team is pushing for a particular direction or a particular product, and work with them on that? And as part of that, I'm a big fan of, like I said earlier, the co-location of QA teams. Put people together. People that are together talk together. They go to lunch together. They go to dinner together. When we're working those late nights together, they talk. And it makes for a much better partnership. So we'll talk about the Scrum process for a quick moment here. We have this product backlog, and I'll explain where we're going here in a second. But we have this product backlog. We then have a sprint planning session where we take some of those items and we put them into a sprint. Then we have our daily cycle. And then we have an output at the end of that, which is potentially shippable increment. We have a retrospective that leads over back to the backlog, and anything that we didn't do well here or we didn't complete, we put over here. The question is, where is QA involved in this process? Let's see if I can. So where is QA involved in this process? And the answer is pretty simple. QA is involved everywhere. When we start talking about what's in the backlog, we start the design process, we start there with QA. QA should be involved in the building of the backlog, what's going into it, what's the goal, what's the plan. And for those of you who aren't so familiar with Agile, the product backlog is the big list of work. It's if I come to your company and I read your product backlog, I should know what game you're building, the type of game, the IP, the general features that you're going to have. I won't know the details. I won't know how many scripters you've got and how many engineers and whatever it might be, but I'll know the game that you're building. So if we're planning on building a game here, we should probably have our QA teams doing the same thing. We should have that QA involvement in the process, because we might choose a feature that let's take an XBLA title. We might have a feature that just simply isn't going to pass the muster with them. So QA typically will catch those early on, and we'll be able to give the team a better notification. Hey, you've got a potentially blocking product here. Moving into the sprint, of course, we talked about this concept of being involved in the daily process over here with the daily stand-up throughout this entire sprint process. And then obviously at the end of this time, we're going to go through a process of passing these acceptance tests for completion, whatever you're going to call them. And I advise everybody to try and, when I'm with clients, I advise everybody to set up a process that as a feature is delivered, to test each one of those features as early as you can to certify them off and lock them off. Don't deliver this one giant feature at one time and then expect QA to be able to go through and test all this and test the Microsoft standards, test the Sony standards, test the game completion standards all in a day. So try and break up these sprint features into a small section that you're always chipping away, so that when you get to the end of this time that you do have a potentially shippable increment here. So, and then obviously QA should be heavily involved in the retrospective. As a game leader, I know what we've done that's wrong. We've made some mistakes during the sprint. But QA will also point out some of the things that I probably didn't catch. It might be that we delivered features late. It might be that we delivered code that was inadequate, or we had a particular section of the product that was just never tested, and that's not okay either. So we've talked about this, QA involved in the feature design. So we've got the backlog here. We've got some key indicators here that we need to be looking at. We have our risk, our testing requirements, platform requirements. These are things that you should bring to the table as QA representatives. Let me know what you think is a problem. If I throw out a feature that we're going to be working on in this product backlog, I need to know what the risk is from your standpoint. So the TD is going to come under risk, the art designer is going to come under with a risk, probably the developer that's assigned to is going to have a risk, but QA's got a risk involvement here as well. Whether it's difficulty of testing, complexity, requires a number of specialty testers they need to go out and hire. Let's make sure we include that. And one thing that I kind of focus on is user value. QA testers, I will tell you, tend to be more passionate than most of the game teams are, because they're typically gamers. They're people who play games. They play a lot of games. They don't play your game. They play every other game that's out there, because they test your game all day long, but they're playing the Portals and all the cool games that are out. So get their input, because they typically will have great user perspective. Product backlog priority. Get them. Make sure that we're involving everybody in this process, and of course in the release and sprint planning. Make sure that everybody's involved in this process, though. So development begins. So during the development cycle, of course, we've talked about the sprint planning, discussing the priority, making sure that when we are committing those items from the backlog to the sprints or to the waterfall schedule, as we do that, as we say, okay, we're going to start this next phase, make sure everybody understands what the common goal will be. That includes what the expectation of the acceptance test is. Don't go into a sprint and start a sprint without your acceptance test being written. Don't go into a sprint without a clear understanding of what the goal of the sprint is. And understand that your priority is going to drive a lot of things. When we talk about the resource assignments, I like to make sure that in the sprint planning session that we put a resource on every item. That way when QA starts to look at, okay, this feature's in development, we start seeing some check-ins going on. They know who to get this information from. But as part of that, who approves that user story that resource has been assigned to? Is it QA that's going to do the ultimate TFC sign-off or acceptance test sign-off? Is it going to be the producer? Is it going to be the product owner, whoever it might be? We need to define those goals up front, as well as the tasks. So TFCs should be written, as I mentioned earlier, TFCs should be written before the sprint starts. I like to see QA write the TFCs. I've been to studios where the person developing the work develops the TFCs. I will tell you that's going to lead to a pass almost every time, because if I'm writing the TFC and I'm writing the code, I will get it right every time. Designers in some cases will do this as well, but I like QA to do it because, of course, it gets them more involved in the process. It also gets them talking to the designers and the producers in a much more cohesive way. Embedded testing. Establish a process for approving user stories as completed. Who approves each user story? Who is responsible for testing each user story? Then we create a workflow committing this process. For those of you who have I've been out to your studio, and I look at CD because I was just at his studio. I'm a big fan of when a feature is completed, the first thing it does, before it goes into the daily build, is it goes to QA. QA will test that feature. They'll either approve it, saying, hey, we tested the feature, it meets its acceptance criteria, we found no obvious bugs, we're going to go ahead and allow it to the daily build. That's the ideal solution. What that's going to stop is, I completed a feature, QA tests it, it either doesn't pass an acceptance test, or it has a bug and it goes in daily build and we've broken the build, or we've got something glitchy that's going to cause problems. By setting up these workflows and these processes, we're going to stop a lot of the bug, just the general bug, I call them the nuisance bugs, that are going to happen. Because as people start to, as developers and artists start to check in content, they're going to know that before it goes anywhere, QA is going to take a look at it. They're going to check for acceptance criteria, so that will, of course, make me think twice. But even more importantly, they're going to check it for those dumb bugs, the crashes. When I checked it in, did I break something that it touches in a major way? So catch those early, and what you'll end up doing is you'll avoid that cascade that happens down the line, where a couple of bugs early in a sprint can lead to a lot of bugs 2 or 3 sprints later, especially when you're working on a long feature or subsection. Okay, so this again, more of what we we're just talking about, establishing a process for managing bugs found during the sprint. So I'm a big believer that when you commit to a sprint, you should try and meet all your goals, right? Release, waterfall schedule, whatever it might be. I'm a big believer in delivering what you've said you're going to deliver. But I'm even a bigger fan of delivering quality. So if I have to take and I have to cut a feature in order to improve quality, I'll do it. I'll do it every time. The important thing is to know that why, down the line, why we had to cut features. But in the sprint, it is far more important that if I deliver 9 features, those 9 features are relatively bug-free. I'm not an alpha quality person. I'm a beta quality person. I want to see this as code that could, as we had in our example, could potentially ship today. And those of you who are working on more iterative titles or casual titles, that's even more important because you might be shipping every 2 weeks. So we'll be more worried about quality of deliverable than the quantity of deliverable. And account for the time it takes to do bugs. One of the most common problems I've found is that somebody will take and load up a sprint or a release or a planned session, whatever their increment time is, to the max with hours. These are all the features we're going to develop. What they don't account for is that time that we know is coming. Nobody has ever written code, ever, that was bug-free. So if you've got a 2-week sprint, you probably need to reserve at least a day of that 2-week sprint for bugs, at least. And the longer your sprint or the longer your release is, you probably need more time. And then in addition to that, you should also reserve time to commit the what we call escaped bugs, which are those bugs that are found by, say, the central testing teams. Embedded, we call them embedded bugs, of course, if it's an embedded team, but those escaped bugs, you need to handle those in a way that kind of keeps them manageable and within a reasonable number. I remember a few years ago on a product I was working on, we went into alpha with about 9,000 escaped bugs, let's call it, and that's a significant hurdle when you go into alpha to start way up here and have to work your way down while QA is really ramping back up. So you're behind the 8 ball already, and it's something we should really try to avoid. So take care of those A's and B's or whatever your top priority bugs are. Take care of those in the sprints. If I find them, if my central QA finds an A bug in my last sprint, I will probably try and get it resolved in the next sprint so that we don't carry those over too far. So let me go through here. So establish a process for these escaped bugs, accounting for the time, who the bug's assigned to, from a development standpoint, who the tester is, and what is the priority in the sprint. We kind of need to balance our time with development and quality. And I was working with a studio just recently who has a requirement that they don't carry any bugs in their database beyond sprint to sprint. So if they have escaped bugs, so their central testing team finds a bug, they will actually take that bug and they will commit to the next sprint. And they will commit all of them to the next sprint that they're going to fix, not those known shippables or invalids, whatever it might be. But they will commit all of their bugs to the next sprint. And they work on bugs before they'll work on feature development. Now that's a pretty tough nut to swallow, right? It's a big deal to say we're not going to work on features first. We're going to work on bugs first as a matter of design and development. But it's also a great way to think about it because from their standpoint, quality is job one. If they don't have any bugs in front of them, they have a free and clear path to develop whatever they want. They can go try new things because they know they don't have this debt that's coming that they have to pay at the end. So that's important. So if you can get your teams or whether you're on the QA side or on the development side, if you can get your teams involved in that and agreeing that that's the right process, it's going to help significantly. So managing the bug database. So this is where we're really talking about this, probably more the central team. So equal partners in project development, the product backlog, project screen, and bug database. Product backlog, because that's where we have our big list of work. This is where we're working on everything. and this is where everybody's collecting that information, all those bugs, defects, wherever it might be. So these are equal partners. We talk about the bug workflow. We need to talk about category and permission. So what kind of bugs are we developing, or are we capturing? What kind of priorities do we need to put to these? And then we start looking at, okay, are we going to handle escape bugs? How are we going to handle each one of these escaped? Or sorry, my mind just went blank. Sorry. How are we going to handle the invalids, the known shippables? We need to define early and often, or as early as we can, exactly each status and what we're going to do with each status. Resolved, found. How are we going to define whether those are going to move from that step to the next step, or what it's going to take to close a bug out? So figure that bug workflow out early. And then constant grooming of bugs and data. Typically what I'll see when I go into a studio is I'll see a list of thousands of bugs. Just like I'll go into a studio and we talk about the product backlog, I see thousands of items in a product backlog, and usually they're not managed and groomed. When we talk about grooming bugs and data, it's consistently looking at what bugs are in the database and why they're there. I'm a big fan that if we have a known shippable category, that we don't carry known shippables past the next release. I'll leave it for the rest of this current release, and if I don't commit it to the next release, it's going away. Now, of course, that's a process that needs to be worked out, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But if you're carrying 500 known shippables, you've probably decided to live with them, especially if you decided they're not important for the next 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it might be. So either plan them out, put them in a product backlog, get them added as a feature, or get them into a sprint and get them resolved. But manage that number. Same thing with these D and E bugs, these bottom of the barrel bugs. Figure out how many of those you're going to carry around. If you're not carrying, if you're not going to resolve them soon, get rid of them. It's causing nothing but a headache for you as QA leaders or project managers to have to manage these bugs that you're not going to fix. But that's a process that needs to be worked out between both of you. Manageable bug counts. Bugs found in sprints should be resolved in sprints. We've talked about this a little bit already. I'm not a fan. If I'm developing a feature in a sprint, that bug gets resolved in that sprint, even if it causes later on work or the cascading work to be pushed out. It's more important to leave the sprint with a quality product than it is with a quantity product. And then, of course, continuously commit escape bugs to sprints. We also have this concept in Agile of these hardening sprints. And I will tell you that I am not a fan of them. And for those of you who don't know what a hardening sprint is, it's typically a sprint that's at the end of a development cycle, usually the sprint right before the release happens, where we take and we just commit bugs, and that's all we're working on. Now, there might be very valid reasons why you could do this, but I will tell you that almost all the time I've seen this happen, on my teams, even on teams that I visit throughout my role with Handsoft, and I visited hundreds of teams, individual teams. And every time I see this, what this turns into is another feature development sprint. So you're trying to cram everything you didn't get completed into that last sprint. That's usually not a great situation. If you can plan a hardening sprint out correctly, what you're doing is you're taking everything that you've built in that last release, and you're just finishing off any bug that was related that you couldn't get to for some reason, whether it was capacity, time, whatever it might be. But if you are going to do these hardening sprints, make sure you plan them out in detail, because they will end up being just a empty bucket at a time. And of course, having come from the design side as well, I will throw a design in there and say, hey, let's get this in while we've got time as well. So make sure you're accounting for that. Typical bug data. Bugs should contain the following relevant information. Of course, I'm trying not to talk too low here, but detailed description, tester and version found, repro steps, type, priority, likelihood. We'll talk more about this in just a moment. Screenshot, video log file, work remaining if using Agile. We want to make sure we get an estimate on that so that if we do say this is going to be completed in the sprint, when we commit it back, we're accounting for that time that it's going to take to actually do that. Bug prioritization. Key project priorities. Product backlog, release, sprint, bug backlog. This is all about figuring out where we should do something. Should we do it in the product backlog? Should we do it in the release? Should it be committed to the sprint? And then at the bug backlog level, we need a clear way of defining what bugs should be addressed in what order. Now, I'm a big fan of user pain. I don't know how many of you have seen this information, but the guys over at Lost Garden have a great information, and I think this will end up being posted. This link will end up being posted after this session, and you can take a look at it. But they've come up with some great information and put it together. So there are 3 criteria. The type, and of course they've got seven identification types, and I'd love to say that I came up with this, but these guys were brilliant at figuring this out. So come up with more than one criteria for deciding what a bug priority is, because one sort of criteria is not really a great way to kind of hack down where you need to get to in order to know what is important. So 7, of course, is a crash. It's very rare that you would let a crash go beyond the initial check-in. 6, major usability issues. This is really about this concept of user pain. It's really about making products better for the user, not for the designer, not for the producer, not for the dev director, not for marketing, but for the person actually playing the game. They'll far appreciate you more if you take it in that account. And the reason, when you think about the reason why we would want to focus more on the user, is that we typically will look at bug counts. We'll fix what's easy, right? First thing we'll do is we got the crashes out of the way, because of course we should be handling that in a better process. But if I turn my team loose on 400 bugs, 500 bugs, first thing they're going to do is they're going to kill the easy ones, right? And then towards the end of that time, they're going to be starting to hit those harder and harder bugs. Well, there's probably a better likelihood those harder and harder bugs were bugs that were affecting the user in a more adverse way. It takes a long time to get into a particular section of the game. Data doesn't get returned like it should be. So coming up with these ways of, with this user pain process, and of course you can change any of these to anything you'd like, but it's important that we have more than one criteria. So we have type, then we have priority. And then we hop through here. Priority, how will those affected feel about the bugs? So again, blocking, user would return the product. Coming up with your own definitions is perfectly fine here, but think about this as just another 3 columns in your Excel sheet that you're sorting against, or your handsoft if you're really agile now, and then of course likelihood. How likely is this to happen? Will affect all users, most users, almost no users. I got a bug back from QA one time that took 17 steps to reproduce. It was a valid bug, but it's probably not one in this example that I'm going to fix right off the bat, right? Because it almost nobody's going to go 17 steps on this controller to get to this particular bug. So try and use these to decide what's most important to the end consumer, what's most important to the people actually playing the game. So if we look at this in an example, this is what we would look at. Sorting criteria. So I might sort by primary, then by secondary, and then my third option to see, and of course any version of these. These are the kind of sorting criteria I would use to determine which bugs should be addressed first. And in this case, we are talking about escaped bugs, because of course if we develop a bug in a sprint based on our features that's being delivered in that sprint, that's where we're going to fix it. This is more of an escaped bug process. And a bug database example. So we would do something like this, where we have our description and our bugs and our testers and our process, except we're going to be using these columns to decide in which order those should appear. So for me, communication is key. Partnerships, not adversaries, because of course that's going to feed into this one, right? If you and I don't get along, we're probably not going to talk. And I will tell you that my first experience at EA with my QA lead was not a positive one. It took a long time before we could build a relationship to where we were partners again. We were able to talk about what was important. And I remember my team was developing a live game, a live product, and we went live, and we decided at that point to switch to an agile development model. And I went to this lead and I said, okay, we're going to be going agile, and I'm not going to be delivering these long-range plans for you to do estimations on. I'm not going to be delivering these long-range designs fully completed out. And the first thing this person said to me was, okay, had we not had a partnership, QA's first response would typically be, no way. I want to see the design completed before we start this. I want to see, I want to have this big, long process up front instead of finding a way to work together. So at the time, this QA lead and I, we sat down and we figured out exactly how we were going to deliver our first release. And we were partners in that from the standpoint that they had every bit of input that they wanted to have. I gave them all the freedom to ask for whatever information they felt they needed, but it's because we had trust, because we weren't adversaries. We had communication. They sat with the team. They didn't sit off in a building next door, not a floor down below. They sat with the team. When my team had steak, they had steak. When my team had pizza, they had pizza. You know, we were not any different than people together, working together. Get involved. If you're on the QA side, it's up to you, if you're not involved in that process now, to say I want to be involved in that process. Get that education I talked about earlier. Get those classes, get those certifications, attend these conferences. But foremost, above everything, is go find the person on that team that can help you get closer. That product owner, that scrum master, the producer, the project manager. Tell them you want to be more involved. But by going out and getting that individual education I talked about, kind of on this being progressive front, going out and getting that education and learning about the things that aren't necessarily in your job scope, that's going to make you a better QA lead, better QA tester, a better product manager, a scrum master, whatever it might be. Well, in the agile process, we talk about be progressive. Don't stay where you are today. Don't get to a process. Say, that's it. We've reached this panacea. We've reached where we're going to be. Always be looking for what the next efficiency you can get out of your process is. Don't make a process change every single sprint. Don't make 2 of them. Make 1 of them maybe once a release, once every 2 or 3 sprints maybe. But what you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, this is the area that I think between myself and the team, or the team and my QA group, that I can be impactful, that we can make this one change and see an efficiency occur. Because those incremental efficiencies will get you a long way by halfway through the project or through the end of a project. And then you start that next project, you've got all this learning and all this experience that you can take forward. As part of that, don't be impressed by your success. I can tell you that we delivered a great product in this digital distribution product I was talking about earlier. We delivered a great product. 4 months into it, we'd gotten lazy. Our bug database was growing slightly. Our team was getting a little lazy. We were still delivering great product, but we weren't being as good as we could be. So we really made an effort at that point to start becoming more agile again. We started applying more of the process. We started involving QA, and not involving QA, I shouldn't say that. We started getting QA to be more progressive about what they were testing and how they were testing it, so they could be leading a lot more of it. And the cool thing was that in that example, our QA team were ravenous fans of the game. It was an online trivia game. And the cool thing was they would go out there and they would play that game for hours. Even when they were done with their work, they would play that game, and you could see them logged in as you're kind of checking the game. You could see the QA tester, and of course we knew their names. But so that was cool because they became fans of the product because they weren't just testing it, but they had an involvement. They had a reason to be excited about the game rather than, I've checked how I can put this disk in and out 20 times a day. Now they're involved in the process. So that said, we kind of moved through these quickly, but I want to open up for questions, and we can talk about generalities or with your product or kind of what I've showed or talked about today. So I kind of turn it over to the group and say questions. Bueller? Sure. I mean, resources are always, especially in today's economic environment, resources are always at a premium. I would say that depending on your team size, it kind of scales with that. So my rule of thumb is 1 in 5. So 1 QA tester is for every 5 content providers. And if you're generating a lot of, if these are artists, you might up that number depending on how you want to do that. But generally 1 tester can hold 5 developers worth of content. So it's, unfortunately, it's a difficult challenge to go to either your QA lead, your QA manager, director, or a team and say, look, I need 2 more QA people, even though that's going to cause you to, not get another developer or not get another artist, whatever it might be. But if you can make the argument that we can improve quality, and if we can improve quality, we can improve funds based on that or revenue based on that, then there's some argument to be had there of what's the balance between development, and QA. But it's kind of a difficult thing with, especially in today's economic climate where everybody's kind of fighting over a very limited set of dollars. So it all depends on your product. A sprint is a time boxed piece. You could do a release after each sprint, or oftentimes a release will contain many sprints and many teams. You take a traditional, Gen 3 title, you might have 20 sprints culminated inside of a single release. On a Facebook product, you might, so on the Facebook products I've developed, we literally every week we had a sprint, and at the end of that sprint, we release that content. Sure.
How much of that ties back to the
I mentioned earlier that QA are often more ravenous fans of playing games. I admit I play games. I'm not a gamer, but the QA teams that I've had, they're, I don't want to make myself sound old, but they're usually young and hip, and they're watching the list of what's coming out in the next couple of days, and so they're buying it as soon as it's coming out. So if you've got a team that is passionate about what they're doing or the product they're working on, they're going to deliver you. They're going to bring feedback. I would rather have that feedback. I'd rather have a QA tester, even if it's a junior tester, saying, "Hey, this just doesn't seem fun to me." Maybe you choose to take that information and do something with it. Maybe you don't. But at least somebody's willing to stand up and say, "I don't think this is what we should have." I worked on a streaming golf game. Freudian slip there. I worked on a streaming golf game where the QA guys were passionate. I mean, they played nonstop in this game. It was insane how much they played this game, and they would come to us with brilliant ideas. Some of these were monetization ideas. Some of these were, "Hey, this flow is terrible. It took me 10 clicks to get into the game. You should listen to that information," and I would expect that information and feedback. I wouldn't put it into a bug, because I can tell you I don't like bugs as features. I like to get in our sprint review, hey, here's some things we looked at. We got all this testing done, and we also took a look at what do we feel we could do to make things better. What is it that the guys were playing the game, and takes 9 steps before you're at the play screen. They're going to give you good information and feedback like that. So I'm always open to it, and I think that everybody should be open to what is the gameplay experience from my testers, because they're most likely going to be part of my core market. I'd say there's always, you catch the, we should have thought about that, but I can't say I've had anything that was, wow, we just completely blew that, other than, they told us, in one particular game I worked on, that the monetization was too picky and or too much. And so, of course, marketing's, finance, we want more money. Gameplay, we want more gameplay. So, we try to pick a middle ground, but in the end, they came back and said, we think that we're nickel and diming too much. And I think that's what we saw in the long term. Okay. Got a question?
Typically not what I see.
Mm-hmm.
Just doing this very
well, so, and I think that's going to be the challenge no matter what we're doing. So when I was at development firms and doing it, it's easy because I was the decision maker. I could decide what was going to be quality because it was my job to deliver. So from my standpoint, it was originally I'd love to say that I came up with bringing Agile into the studio that I was working with, but it was one of my managers who came to me originally and said, we should try this, and here's why. And bugs were part of that, and this fast iterative style was part of that. And I at first said no, and then he came back and was smart enough to convince me to do this. So when you start pushing that information up, you need to approach it from the same way of what's the benefit going to be immediately. The benefit immediately is going to be of resolving bugs is that we're going to carry less technical debt. We're going to carry less creative debt. Creative debt being that media side. Screens half finished, or we've got 24 screens marked as completed, but every one of them needs the button's the wrong color. We'll just change the color. Why carry that around? If we know it's wrong, why not just wipe it off and say it's done? So you should start collecting metrics, of course, if you're not collecting metrics, because that's really where you're going to be able to turn around and say, here's an empirical piece of information that we can look at that says, okay, last sprint we created this many features or this many hours of features, we generated this many bugs, and we resolved this number of bugs in that sprint, and we lost this number of features. What we've done, though, is we've seen that, and of course, this is going to have to take place over a series of sprints. You'll see the number of bugs, those, let's call them escaped bugs. You'll notice those number of bugs trailing down, probably because you're completing some of them in the sprints that you're committing, but you're not going to be generating as many bugs. So if you can come up with this chart very quickly that shows that by the time we reach alpha out here, that our bug database is at a very manageable number, that's a very eye-opening piece of information, because I will tell you most bug charts do this all the way to the end towards alpha, and then at the alpha it kicks up really high as we start testing, and it flattens out, and then it pans down. If we can show that bug chart going like this, so that we know that we're getting towards alpha with a lower number of bugs, and you don't have to show that you're going to be 50% lower, 40% savings, 30% savings, that's a significant amount of time, especially depending on your team size. You've got 100 people and you're going to develop 40% less bugs, or you're going to have 40% less bugs by the time you get over to alpha. That's probably going to cut your alpha hours significantly. So start using that empirical data to build that information, looking at the bugs that you're generating per sprint and completing versus the bugs that you're also having in your database, if that makes sense. I work with a lot of studios, and with my role at Handsoft as senior production expert, my role is really to bring best practices to the organization, whether it's in Handsoft or, more typically it's just explaining best practices in general. I go to the same approach. And some of them choose to take it and some of them choose not to. But I will tell you, the studios that do take it, I often get feedback from saying, this has helped our process tremendously because they're no longer carrying as much debt around. And of course, one bug in the beginning equals a lot more bugs at the end. And then I fix this one bug, and then I probably have to go through and quite frequently I'll have to fix several locations instead of just finishing that bug that I had originally, because it just cascades. If you can stop that cascading from taking place, then you're going to be in a much more manageable position towards the end. And hopefully, if you've burned this bug down, you're 30, 40% down with a good target, that you're not going to see that giant spike at the end, because QA is already testing, right? One of the things I didn't talk about in here was something that I'm a fan of is looking at what QA internally is finding, my embedded team, versus what my external team is finding. And I'm kind of a hard-nosed person that if my external QA team finds a crash, I'm going to be unhappy with my internal team, my embedded team. Those people should be hammering my game every bit as much as the guys out here. And the reason is that they're the first line of defense. They're the people saying, hey, we've checked this game. So put that pressure on your embedded teams. And if you're running an embedded team, put that pressure on yourself to make sure that, this central team should be about, to me, the central team should really be about passing the platform compliance, passing certification, passing the billing, and all that information that maybe we don't have as much experience or access to. Let them do those things. I'm not saying don't test them. I'm saying let them verify the information. But they shouldn't be finding crashes, outside of the normal builds. It just shouldn't be. So, if we have built this thing down, we have built this ramp down, and then we hit back up, it probably means that we're still not doing enough testing on the embedded side. And I would almost rather see embedded testers coming from the central team and being put on the embedded team so that we have more capacity up front. So. Anything else?
I'm looking at maybe hiring some testers in my studio today, and trying to bring
You know, I built a team at EA when I first started, and I remember going through this process, and I was new to development at that, or new to games development at the time, and I ended up hiring 40 people, and not one of those 40 people had ever been in the games industry before. But what they brought a passion for what they did. That was all I care about. You know, my technical director would tell me if they were smart enough. My art director would tell me if they were creative enough. But what I cared about was, did they care about what they were doing? And so that's my number one thing. When I look at a tester, I look at anybody as, what's their passion for what they're doing? Do they care about what they're working on? You know, I'm not a big fan of people who say, I want to work on this product only. Because, let's face it, after 15 minutes of testing, pulling a network connection, that's going to get old. But do they care about why they're doing it? Are they passionate about games? Are they passionate about their job? Are they passionate about why they're going to work every day? That's important to me, almost above all else. I'll take a more junior engineer that has passion than a senior engineer that's well, I'll show up today and I'll write my code. That's my belief. If you can get passion in an individual, that will supersede a lot of experience. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you very much then.